Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Tuesday the 6th of June, and you are watching episode 88 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap providing insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, the 2023 federal budget. A pointer to prosperity or poverty is my guest, Dr. Marcus Smith. Marcus is a leading independent applied economist. He joined us last in April to discuss the revenues generated by the coal industry and the prospects of the new energy economy replacing those vast inputs. Tonight, he joins us again to provide his analysis of the 2023 federal budget and the pathway which it leads us. Welcome, Marcus.
Welcome, Bill. Great to be back.
Thanks for joining us again. Well, it's been a month almost and we've had the Labor government going selling its budget, but some of the realities seem to be a little different from their messaging. Exactly how different do you find their messaging and the reality at the moment?
Well, I mean, they're sort of playing the typical tune. I mean, a lot of the stuff that's coming out is government spending. Is it not inflationary? Well, it is, and I disagree with a lot of the commentary going on at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of things that we'll look at because I'll put some slides together as usual to go through all the budgets and some of the little surprises there, and sort of with respect to the budget surplus, and I'll explain how that came about and how it's different from a few years ago where they didn't actually put the future funds, future fund earnings into the net earnings into the actual underlying cash balance, which provided that surplus.
And the other thing with this budget too is a bit of surprise in the it was well ahead of forecast revenue generation. So the government did get a bit of a windfall.
Oh, they certainly did, and you'll see that in the company the company taxes, obviously from the mining sector. There's also I'll also show you the royalties. Royalties are predominantly given through states, but the federal government picked up $1 billion in royalties over that year, 2022-23 as well. So did phenomenally well out of the resources sector. It was pretty much Gina Rinehart's surplus, not the government's. So.
Well, we might as well get underway with your presentation and lead us through it.
Yep, sounds great. And I will go full screen tonight because there's so much detail in there. Okay. So just to start off, let's move this out of the way. So essentially, there's a couple of ways when you're looking at analysing the budget. There's two approaches. There's essentially the cash basis, which you derive the underlying cash balance, and then there's a accrual accounting basis, which you end up with a net operating balance. So this is just on the operating balance itself of general government. So in cash basis terms, that includes receipts and payments. So that's essentially the actual funds that are transacted during the financial year up to June 30. So what's been received and what's been spent in actual terms. Accrual accounting terms takes into account that sort of has like accounts receivable and payable that have been transacted within the financial year, but the funds haven't actually been reconciled within that financial year, but they can be expected to eventuate in time, even though the transaction occurred in that year. So that's predominantly international standards where they have to do reporting, so it standardizes it all. And I guess the thing, just because you've got the revenue and expenses, those components where they can be different, is revenue is, if, for example, if a government gives someone a fine or something, just because they give a fine doesn't mean that they're actually going to get paid for it in the future. But the transaction is actually counted, and that's exactly with expenses as well. So that's the difference between the two. Predominantly, I'll be the media and everything as you'll see them, and I'll talk a little bit about the underlying cash balance first up. They generally talk about the when you're reporting on the surplus and everything with respect to the underlying cash balance. That's on the cash basis, but that doesn't take into account your capital expenditures, your net capital outlays, and it doesn't give you your overall fiscal balance, because the government, obviously they have their expenses, but they also have government spending with respect to on hospitals and roads and infrastructure, and that is part of the spending as well, which is taken away from revenues, will give you the fiscal balance. And obviously, if you're spending, your general government spending and your capital outlays, if that spending is more than your revenue, then you'll have to essentially borrow. So you'll have a negative fiscal balance. Whereas if it's positive, then you'll have funds to invest. So going through the actual, and I'd sort of level it here, the 2022-23 and the comparative 2018 and 19 surplus, because they're not actually they weren't.
That's only 4 years. That's only 4 years different.
No, but I'm actually, remember when Frydenberg said we're back in black?
Yeah.
And they copped it and said, no, well, you're not. It's an actual $690 million deficit. But if you look down the bottom there, you can see there from 2021 onwards, the net future funds cash earnings, which you can see there, they're actually included. Whereas back in Frydenberg's time, they weren't included. Back then it was revenue minus expenses minus the future fund earnings. So if you actually take into account the future fund earnings, as they did in the 2022-23 surplus, you'll actually see there that the surplus is much larger if you were for a like-to-like comparison. So even though we have ended up with a surplus of 4.2 billion, obviously that's been driven predominantly by the net future fund earnings being included, where they weren't previous to 2020-21.
What in accounting?
If you take those out and compare it to the way it was previously measured, the underlying cash balance, it would actually be a deficit still of 1.1 billion.
What allowed them to change that sort of accounting method? Was it something internationally, or was it something they just decided to do the books that way as a Labor government?
Well, that was the thing. It wasn't predominantly a Labor government decision, but they become available to meet the government superannuation liabilities from that year. That's what was stated with respect to the change. So, but this is the cash balance. As I said, I'm going to be going through the actual on the accrual accounting basis, all the figures, because a lot of them are presented like when you're breaking down by programs and functions of government and everything, they're all presented in accrual terms and not presented in cash basis terms. So, but the difference there also is that the net operating balance, the accounting accrual, has always included the net future fund earnings. Okay, which the underlying cash balance hasn't before 2020-21. So this while we saw the announced surplus and everything, this sort of wasn't discussed, this sort of a creative accounting, but you can see there that obviously there's a little bit of puffery with respect.
I suppose that puffery was welcome, because those years in between 2018-19 to 2023 is the COVID and the COVID spending, and we knew that was horrific. So, like I say, if we didn't change the accounting of the future fund, we would see the real impact in the figure that's been glossed over now.
Certainly, and also the thing is, you'll see the actual the capital outlays were very low in 2018-19 too. They were relatively low at only 4 billion compared to a much larger capital spend, as you'll see for 2022-23. So you've got to have a look at what the whole components of of everything that goes together towards the end when we're looking at the fiscal balance. But we'll keep going.
Yep, move on.
A lot to go through. So even with a full screen, I think I'm going to have to. You won't be able to see the whole thing, is that right? So I might have to.
Well, we're right up to 3.5% over that side.
Yeah, I've only got major bank levy on the bottom for mine. What about you?
Yeah, yep.
Same.
I just have to scroll up.
Down. Yep. Okay, because it goes all the way down here. So I've had to squeeze it all in to go through everything. Okay, so breaking that down. So I've gone through and found the accrual accounting revenue. They were difficult to find. They weren't actually in the across the estimates. They weren't in the actual revenue themselves. I had to go through the historical to bring it all out because all the expenses and capital expenditure and everything, as I said, is in accrual terms. So to make it all relative. So these are all across the estimates there. So you can see that, tax on individuals, that's going to be going up at, on average, or 19.6%, but on average over the estimates of 4.9%, which is in line with total spending, as we'll see. You can see here, the impact there on company taxes, as we spoke about, how large they were, relatively large they were in that year, thanks to, the mining industry company taxes there, payroll taxes, etc. Payroll taxes on top of that, obviously, because that's obviously 30% of the company's earnings. So that predominantly had a lot to do with with that surplus in driving that.
So how sad would we have been if we didn't have record coal prices? A lot sadder.
Well, you can see how they're, how they're going to be stepping in here, along here. How when they start to return back to, to relatively, they'll be elevated from what we were in the previous years. But you can see there was a significant elevation within that year. So that had a lot to do with it. The petroleum resource rent tax, they've been playing around with that. You can see that's going to be driven up over time, not predominantly by a lot though. Superannuation changes, so you can see that that's going to start to increase significantly, by 162%.
Is that the part where they're charging people with over 3 million?
Yes.
Is that the sort of impact?
Yes, that's the impact that they've projected going forward on those revenues. So that's going to be a significant upshift as well. Let's see all the other things. Obviously, the carbon pricing mechanism only came in. It was only in for a couple of years from Rudd and Gillard, so there were a few back here, but obviously that doesn't exist anymore, but it's still included in there. Going down, there's not really any significant sort of changes around there. I'll go through the non-taxation revenue here. So that will include, in the next slide, that will include your royalties here. So you can see that, so this is built in as part of that other. So you can see there the significant increase there in federal government royalties, which are in addition to what's paid out to state governments as well.
So the royalties, I thought all royalties were the domain of states. So is this So coal producers and other producers have got both a federal and a state royalty
Well,
regime.
yep, there's that component there. So obviously there's an extra, an extra billion there that was derived over that year as well. You don't have to worry about seigniorage or anything like that. That's just got to do.
But that's relatively small.
Government and money,
the state's share.
Sorry.
That's relatively small compared to the state share.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, certainly smaller, significantly smaller. Definitely. Because we went through those royalties with Queensland in particular, and we saw how how large that would be.
Oh, I mean, how lucky is Dick going to be this year with extra $12 billion worth of royalties?
Certainly, yeah, and what about 9 in coal or so? Yeah, so obviously separate to the federal royalties. So essentially here that then gives you your total revenue. Where importantly, it's only going to increase 14.5% over those 4 years. From this from 2000 to 2022, 23. 1, 2.
Well, that's not exactly growing the pie too much, is it?
No. Well, you'll see where the expenses grow. As I said, we will see that. That's going to be 4.9%. So we'll get to that. Expenses. So I've broken them down by function first, and then we can look at the programs, the top 20 programs themselves, and then we can start to break it down by NDIS and job keeper and job seeker, sorry, and all of those as well. So you'll see defence here is essentially going to rise over those estimates there at 5.5% a year, almost 22%. From 22-23 out to 26-27, and we know that funding is going to increase with the commitments to August, etc.
Yeah, only trouble is they might not have the personnel to do anything.
Well, certainly. We'll see if that goes.
No one's lining up to join the woke defence force at the moment.
Yes. So looking across it, there's a few sectors here losing funding over the time.
Agriculture and forestry and fishing.
Yep.
Mining, manufacturing, losers.
Shopping, yep. Mining and manufacturing.
Wealth creation areas, yeah.
Down. I've broken mining, manufacturing, construction down. Again, I think. Yeah. So I know you wanted to know about what's going to happen with the Northern Australia infrastructure facility there. So you see it's going to have this acceleration here, but then sort of come back, but it's still going to be, there's not going to be much sort of growth there.
To be realistic about it, the Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund has been just a farce in regards to it's only a loan facility, and when it came into force in 2016. We had the lowest interest rates in history. So if you had a business and you couldn't get a loan, well, then your business wasn't worth having.
Yep, definitely. Well, you can see it's not really being used, that much anyway. So, 100 million.
I'm quite surprised it hasn't been wrapped up by now.
Yep. Yeah. But this scheme here has obviously been sliced, the growing business investment scheme. So I'm not too familiar with the sort of uptake on that or anything, but you can see that sort of dropped significantly there, and that's predominantly that's driven that in itself. So predominantly there's housing and community amenities coming down, and we talked about that. Fuel and energy obviously being sort of driven there, so obviously a lot of that's going to be the renewables subsidies and everything involved with that. So that's obviously going through significant growth there.
There's some areas, of course, like education, health, social security, and welfare. Mm-hmm. You haven't got any margin or options but to pay those bills.
And they're also automatic stabilizers as well. So essentially, your job seeker will be low when unemployment's very low. But if the economy does start to slow down as they're expecting, then automatically there'll be more people unemployed taking benefits. So that will automatically rise anyway. So a lot of that is built in as a stabilizer within the economy to be able to stabilize consumption somewhat over downturns and also upturns as well. So social security and welfare acts as that stabilizer, that sort of buffer in over the business cycle as well.
But it is a huge part of our overall budget. If you look there between health and social security and education, well, that's almost half of our money gone.
Yep, certainly. Yep, it's certainly the largest by
and none of those things grow the pie.
Yep, and remember, all these rates are all relative. Because when you're looking over the 4 years, $62 billion increase compared to these, even though this might be 14%. Increase, 6.9% here, but the actual increase itself is phenomenal due to it being much larger in magnitude in spending. So down to the biggest programs. So you can see there your GST redistributions, what they're expected to be. So they're expected to increase over the time. Almost around about 5% a year. Next, you got support for seniors. Okay, your next largest one, that can be expected 5.7% increases. The NDIS, this one here is obviously the one that we're sort of worried about with this significant growth here, going over time and such a large magnitude in spending as well within the budget. So I mean that's all with respect to the budget where they're talking that we're really got to get serious about making sure that it's sustainable, because that you can't have this sort of growth in 53% in over 4 years.
But it was always recognised as a bomb when Gillard dropped it in the initial phase, that it didn't have enough definition in regards to the controlling mechanism, what could then identify as disabilities. Yep. And it's just grown out of proportion. But I also noticed, because I just get a lot of junk emails, I suppose, but I saw there for a while people asking to invest in accommodation for NDIS purposes. And they were guaranteed, when it first came out, they were guaranteeing 21%. This is about a year and a half ago, and it's gradually dropped down to about 14%. But if you're willing to participate in these schemes to create NDIS accommodation, you can get that sort of healthy return. That smacks of someone's making a pretty good quid out of it.
Yep. Well, I think that's been the discussions at the moment that he's sort of talking about. I mean, I'm not to say rights because I don't know that much about it, but you have this sort of verbatim going on.
We have great faith in little Bill.
Definitely. Well, he's flagged it, and we'll see how that pans out in the implementation. So, as always. Yep. So, big movers there. The debt management. You can see there that's going to rise significantly. So I mean that's the thing with having such large debt, and I'll show you that shortly. Obviously, as interest rates continue to rise, as they are, a lot of the government issued securities at very low interest rates. So as we're going now from treasury rates over the 10-year, and that's sitting at 3.7 approaching 4%. On those bonds alone, that is significantly higher than when they issued them. So when they roll them over, they actually have to, they don't pay them out, they just roll them over. So that's essentially what happens. Unless they get a surplus, they have to borrow again. Otherwise, they won't be able to fund the services. So they have to keep rolling those over at higher rates, the higher the interest rates go. So I did do an analysis on that, but that's too much outside of this. I've already written a report on that, some of my estimates, but it can be expected to rise significantly, a lot more than 29 billion there over
Another one there with a good tick is the
2002.
child's care subsidies. Now,
Mhm.
for all the subsidies, you never hear people stop whinging about the cost of childcare. So
Mhm.
it seems like every time they put more money into the subsidy, all that happens is the operators put up their prices. It seems pointless at times.
Yep. Well, essentially, that's what they've said. They're going to bring it up to what, 90% or 90% or something like that. I thought was announced.
We used to look after our own kids, you know.
I know. Yeah, started that around for my mum, so totally agree.
The other thing is there's heaps of people, like in regional Australia, who can't even make use of childcare anyway. Those facilities just don't exist in their little townships or in the outback or whatever. So it really is something that's super focused and beneficial for people in the major cities.
And there's also the placements, the shortage of placements and everything like that. So it's fairly competitive in some places and suburbs and that as well. So that's just another struggling area of Australia and where we're sort of heading. So we could go through all of these, but the fuel tax credit scheme, obviously they've been playing around with that as well, winding that sort of back. So that's going to have an impact as well. So that brings us down to, and you can see down here, so there's other programs there as well. That's what's remained outside of the top 20.
If I could just comment on one thing, but on the bottom lines, Defence Forces superannuation. I remember when I first joined the Air Force as a 15-year-old, they took 5.5% of our pay off us. No questions asked. That was it. That went into a thing called DFRDB. And that was supposed to fund service personnel in their retirement. And the scheme actually operated pretty well. And I think they were getting a bigger and bigger surplus. And when Goff came in, he just couldn't help himself. It was at 19. This is 1969. It was $73 million, and rising at about 12% per year. And he just couldn't keep his hands off it. So he took that into sort of general revenue, and now the government is stuck with Defence Forces pensions, where it never would have been had they let that scheme operate by itself.
Yep, continue. Well, that's, I guess, where they've set up, what the future fund is designed to do. Obviously, so I set it up to pay for, public servants and the public service, superannuation over time. That's what it was designed to do. So, Queensland's the only state across the nation that self-funds its own public servant superannuation, but that's being played around with a bit by Dick as well. So there's a bit of creative accounting going on there within that fund. So, but for the moment it's still there, but we'll see how that goes. But you can see there 4.9% compared to with revenues 3.6% growth. So you can see there that there's a structural problem within the budget. So,
in other words, we just got to get poorer.
Well, here it is. Here's your structural problem. Here's your expenses. Okay, there's your growth, and there's the growth in revenues. And you can see there these structural problems here. Okay, with that growth there over time, you can see there that it's outpacing the growth in revenues.
The inversion seems to have occurred with the GFC and the Rudd government. That we didn't.
Well,
we don't seem to. We got a little bit on top of it there for a
well,
bit.
that was obviously, when Howard started getting the surpluses and everything as well there. So the expenses come down, even though he did sell a lot of assets. There was sort of the growth there had started to sort of stabilize towards revenues growing quicker than expenses. But this when they talk about the structural problem, this is what it is. And it doesn't seem like it's going to be be addressed anytime soon. Governments just can't help themselves, especially Labor ones we're spending.
I don't know if I call it governments can't help themselves. I think it's politicians per se.
Yep.
Like, if you were interested in the government as just being a government rather than being a political party or a politician, your aim would always be to manage the money properly and always end up at least with bounce books at the end of the time. That's only just normal household thing. But they don't seem to have that as a focus, or the nation as a focus. It's simply, well, what can you offer people to get votes or whatever. So I think
the politicisation of the public service has been a problem for a long time, particularly in Queensland, with a lot of what I saw. It is a problem, and that's exactly what you're right, and that's exactly what you're alluding to. Because obviously the Treasurer will probably want to do something, but obviously the Treasurer, the politician, will obviously want more out of than what would necessarily be done. If you have a look at what the Auditor General when they audit the books, they're always interesting to read because they always tell it like it is.
Is that something we may need to look at in the future to give? I think in the United States they call it in the Inspector Generals or whatever, but ours is the Auditor. Do we really need to give the Auditor General more powers or more publicity or ability to talk out to the public what's going on, to say what's needed to happen, or is that just not palatable?
Well, I'm not sure how much influence that they actually have. But whether you institute something like that, I'm not sure, and whether it would be successful to implement it or not would be another thing. But obviously, it's very you want people as far at arm's length of government as possible when you're looking at the books. That's just the nature of the beast.
Oh, at least allow them to be really critical anyway.
Yeah. Oh, so, and that's right. And being able, and we know what happens when if you step out of line, and the government will take your position away and sack you if you're too honest. I think we all know that that's a game. That's not new, and we've seen it play out, particularly in Queensland. Even locally, and that we saw that with the laptop scandals and everything like that. But not to go too much into the politics. I mean, that's not what we're sort of discussing. But obviously, there's that issue there, and you'll see there that the net operating balance is the difference between the actual expenses and revenues that we discussed. Going over time. So obviously so this is before we take into account your actual capital expenditures, which we start to bring in now. So this is the revenue minus the expenses, the operating part of the budget. So your capital outlays, they used to be called capital outlays in the traditional older day budgets, and now they're called purchases of non-financial assets. So rejig the name a little bit, to make it sort of like now it's a purchase of assets. It's not part of government spending. Capital outlays is what it was. Which is the responsibility of government. So if we look at that across where all the actual infrastructure spending goes. By size, we can see that, obviously defence is where predominantly most of it goes.
But defence is only what was it, $40 billion compared to the $600 billion they got.
Yeah, well, these are the actual capital outlays. So this is not what's included, because then this is actually what they're spending in actual capital outlays.
Yeah.
But the actual net value of it, as I'll show you shortly, which goes into your fiscal balances, because this doesn't include depreciation and amortization and stuff. So that's what detracts from this and brings the actual spending down.
I just got a bit of a smirk on my face about the first one, but really, public servant costs going down, or yeah?
Does that ever happen?
I don't know. We'll wait and see.
What's going on here?
Yeah.
I don't know. Going down.
Never happened.
I don't see that happening either. No. Public order and safety. That's
there is none.
I mean, this is the whole thing. They've gone and cut, all the capital expenditure, and if we're going to bring all these people in over the next few years,
that's a big
it doesn't bode well for growing the infrastructure to accommodate it, does it?
But the other thing is, what hospitals does the Commonwealth run? What do they buy stuff?
Well, they
surely
don't.
it only gives money to the states to buy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is just exactly the duplication on that. So there's always been that the duplication within the federal and state governments. But we'll see how that happens. Obviously, here with a lot of that's to do with the COVID response, the legacy there. So that will start to fall back. But a lot of that was due to the COVID response. These
rapid tests and useless vaccines.
Yeah, that are all sitting there unused.
Did we ever find out how much we spent? How much the government spent on rapid tests and vaccines? Would be that must have been a penny.
It's probably buried away somewhere. Anyway, so if you take what goes in then to the fiscal balance to determine whether whether the government need to borrow for this year or whether they can invest, and obviously they're only going to borrow. This actually goes into add on to the spending. So when they take that into account, it brings it down here, so it halves it predominantly down there, and you can see that overall is still coming down. So over time, that net investment there, so it has sort of ramped up here, over these years, and then it's, we're going to come back down, but it still only sits, around about, but we can see here, it's sitting around about, between even less than 1% probably, over the average there, which isn't a lot of infrastructure spending.
Well, the thing is, if you don't invest there, I keep going, you can't grow the pie. If you don't, if you're spending on things that you need to just run, with you've got a welfare bill and NDIS and education and defence taking up, and there's nothing left over to sort of build road infrastructure, dams, and things that will grow the population, grow investment. Although there is investment, I suppose, in hydrogen,
transport.
Things, but
you can see transport there. That's significant here.
So basically, here we are, year 2023, and the Bruce Highway is still a piece of goat's manure. It's
still a goat track. Yeah.
The whole point is,
out of the way.
We're seeing people die on it every year because it's it's underrated for what it's supposed to be doing, and yet there's like sometimes you think, well, maybe we should just let the Chinese there, because we'd probably have a 6-lane dual highway each way between the tip of Australia and Melbourne, with them doing it.
It'll be built in 2 months or something.
Yeah.
2 or 3 months.
But we just seem to do a patch, and then the worst thing is there doesn't seem to be a long-term plan, as in, well, we're going to get this all done in 8 years or something, and all the money allocated and the plan's there. But it's not. It's just a stop and start. Sections get different priorities, and so maybe Rockhampton gets a bit of attention this year, and in 2 years around Townsville, and then maybe around Mackay a few years later. But it's just no coordinated plan for a major artery of Australia.
Yeah. Well, we go up to Yeppoon every September, and exactly. And occasionally we'll go to Townsville, but we'll drive up. But we drive up every year to Yeppoon. And essentially that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's so slow because they're working on so many areas, but it seems that they're not like finishing one and moving to the next. It's sort of like they've got bits and pieces of, and it's, it's frustrating. It slows all the traffic down, and
I mean, road building's always been a bugbear of mine. I think we're probably the worst road builders in the world. But you also, for highways like that, I mean, they continually work on a road that's in use and muck around with it, when they should be looking dual carriage. Well, leave that alone, and let's, at the side of it, 50 yards from it, let's work on uninterrupted roadway that's not going to interfere with traffic. It's not going to have to stop and start because of things, but they just don't seem to have that vision.
No, totally agree. And that's exactly what my partner and I always say. We go, why can't they finish one place and go on to the next and get it done? Like, I don't know. Complex contracts and everything like that would probably play a role in that. But I guess the coordination, it needs to be better.
But if the funding was sort of guaranteed and put in place, maybe it would happen. I mean, I suppose it really has to start with the funding being guaranteed all the way through. First instance,
the pork barreling, exactly, when they get cut projects, and as you can see, they mentioned they were going to go in and sort out what projects, and they were going to chop and change. I don't think the final decisions have come out yet.
I suppose it'd be interesting to see a graph with what you got here and what the total revenue is. Compared this, which is supposed to be wealth creation potential, and just plot it against compare it to the NDIS. Like, NDIS would be up here, and these things would be barely registering.
Yep, certainly in expenditure, in spending, like outright spending before depreciation and amortization. certainly you can see that. But anyway, so then once you take into account, so you got revenue minus your expenses, because your net operating balance, then minus your net investment position, and then you end up here with your fiscal balance. So the fiscal balance tells you it's obviously whether the government's going to need to, whether it's a net borrowing or lending. So obviously, if it's going to run here, like it did, so when you take this into account, everything, you can see there that Frydenberg did deliver on an accrual basis a very small $1.4 billion, when you take it all into account, actual accrual surplus. And when you take everything into account here, it's actually an accrual deficit. The surplus, it disappears.
Yeah, we can see that COVID, gave us.
It's just whacked them. It just whacked them. Definitely.
But we certainly didn't do too well. 2007 onwards, sort of thing. I know the GFC was there, but the government, to me, the government gets in a panic mode if things slow down a bit, and they tend to reheat it. Like, I remember I just finished building a house when John Howard put in the GST, and I remember I was in the progress. I was actually building the house at the time before that came in, but you just see the massive changes as people were aware it was coming in, and the people trying to get things done before the GST came in. And so the rates, it was harder to get goods, it was harder to get workers, and the price went up. And it's the same thing when we had the GFC. Everything the government did, they said, well, we want a stimulus type thing, but everything they did put the prices up of everything. Like, I remember the incentive to get housing kicking along with when the GFC started, and they doubled the first home owners. And then if you built in regional Australia, they'd give you another 30,000 between the state and the Commonwealth. So I think if you're building a house in Ballarat or wherever, or Cairns or that, you could get up to $64,000 extra.
The building revolution, yeah.
Yeah, mm-hmm. But the thing is, with all the demands on workers, materials and stuff like that, because of this stimulation, every house that got built ate up the $64,000 in extra costs. So no one won out of it. Yep. And we left with these sorts of debts. And you can probably, in some of those figures there, you probably see the start of the NBN, and you probably see the start of subsidies into wind power and things like that. That basically just left us going negative all the time.
Yep. No, certainly. And, you know, as you're talking about the boom then, I mean, we're seeing it now with the construction company collapses and everything, and, you know, their profitless boom in most cases within the construction industry at the moment, where, you know, where all the construction, all the costs have gone up for all the inputs, as well as, you know, hard to find the workers to you know, to complete the construction. So, you know, and which is obviously, you know, which is we haven't talked about the, you know, the peripheral sort of areas of, you know, what's going to happen with how we're going to build all these houses, and what's going to happen with when all the immigration comes in, and the impact that's going to have on inflation in particular as well. So, you know, it's going to be challenging times for the next few years, and you know, it's going to be very interesting to see sort of how it pans out, because I think it's going to be a long way away from what they're predicting in the government at the moment. So I don't think they thought it through very well at all.
Well, the thing I'm concerned about is how it impacts on the individuals who were travelling sort of reasonably well, or fairly safe, but now are in a situation where they're looking down the barrel of paying higher wages in small business, extra super and things like that. Yeah. It's going to really be a crunch again. I mean, COVID sent so many people to the wall. It'd be interesting to watch the bankruptcies and that over the next 12 months.
Well, they have started to pick up. Construction's almost doubled from last year, so I did have a look at that. I probably should have showed you the slide across, you know, the increases across industries, and they've started to pick up significantly. But they did come from very low sort of levels with the temporary bankruptcy moratorium, and that has that sort of you know, wound out. But they've certainly started to pick up pace significantly, particularly in obviously the two that are usually the largest is in construction and also hospitality. So, you know, food and accommodation. So they've started to tick up significantly. So anyway, we'll see how that sort of pans out over time. So obviously then, when you're running these sort of fiscal deficits over time,
if you're running that in your household budget, you would be on the street.
Well, yes, heavily indebted with expenses, you know, still outpacing your, you know, well, essentially you'd be broke if you were a business running, you know, this sort of debt, and your expenses were, you know, growing greater than your revenues. I mean, they'd shut you down. But this is the government after all, you know.
Well, the only thing that can shut them down is voters, I suppose.
well, I mean, the thing with business is they can't, make people buy their goods. Whereas the government can just tax people and can make them, give them money. So that's the only way that they can do it. But you can obviously see here the implications for that. And this is your gross debt. So this hasn't taken into account the actual the investment earnings, which are obviously much smaller. But you can see there that it's grown, from as a percentage of GDP. Obviously we had it very low. It was still positive here, even though you'll see it goes negative in the Howard years.
Yeah.
But the reason why he had these are the issues of the securities. The reason why it didn't go positive, why the government, even though they had a surplus and no debt, they essentially had to keep supplying the securities so that there is actually a bond market. So banks could actually hold them to keep transactions for them, because a lot of the small banks don't have access to the international markets like large banks do. So essentially they hold treasury securities, very liquid assets. So it preserved the bond market in treasuries, which is why even though it was a small part, they still issued them, because when you'll see here, obviously the net debt was actually lower than zero, so it was positive. So it's sitting there approximately 24% of GDP now for net debt. So that's sort of where we're heading. As you can see, it's continuing to rise over those estimates. Even with that surplus, you can see here there's been a tick down here, but it's there's still no end in sight. We'll see whether we're going to be able to. I don't know how we're going to be able to turn this around in the future. They've got nothing. They've got nothing left to sell.
That's fairly scary, because that continuation of debt, we've kept out of recession, but it really all has hinged since 2007 on mass migration and the Ponzi scheme.
Yep.
Of those migrants creating actual work, like demand for housing and services and goods. It would be frightening, actually, if we didn't have that migration to sort of gloss over the situation a bit.
Yeah, well, migration's a good thing. Like, we need skilled workers and even sort of unskilled workers where we can't fill the jobs. But it's all, I guess it's all relative to the magnitude. Because as we talked about earlier, the ones that are going to be doing it tough with the wage rises and everything, it's not large business, because they don't have minimum wage or anything anyway. They're not going to feel that. And they're in a position where they just lift their prices anyway. Like small businesses, it's a competitive space. They can't lift. They just have to wear it. So they're in very different. The unions look after their mates and as well as big business. Whereas to them, small business doesn't matter. And even though it employs more than what large business do. But these are significant problems going forward, structural problems, because essentially the ones that are hurting the most at the moment are all your middle class with your particularly with your interest rate rises and inflation. They're the ones that will be hurting, and have the most sort of assets at risk as well with holding the private debt. They're the ones that are going to be, that are actually in the crunch at the moment. And so, where this is going to go, and as the RB governor and the government are playing it down, it's not going to cause a wage price spiral. No, well, yes, it is going to start to do that, because we can start to see we're going to be in stagflation very shortly, and that's exactly what happens. with respect to that. And we've seen that happen before with the oil prices. It's been a couple of years now with persistently, over 5% increases in those wages. It's going to ingrain. I don't think inflation is going to drop down myself. I thought it'd be quite sticky over the next few years. I can't see it dropping down below, the 3% without a significant recession. And people are going, well, I'm hurting, but that's the whole idea of what they're trying to do. People need to hurt. The young people have never seen a recession. This is what happens. This is, part of the business cycle. You can't have your cake and eat it too. It's part of it. But to see how this is going to pan out, I don't know. It's very challenging times, and we're going to have to see restraint in spending very shortly from the government, but they're going to be under that pressure to provide more assistance, and that's the thing. The insistence is just going to create more spending power to keep inflation elevated. And then we're going to see energy prices are not going down from the renewable. It's never worked anywhere else in the world, and it's about time they wake up to themselves and realise what's going on in Europe. And if Australians think that they're going to get cheaper electricity from all of this, they are kidding themselves.
Well, I think anyone who can do a bit of basic research for themselves, could quickly find out that renewables never make cheaper power.
No.
I mean, they keep saying it's the cheapest form of generation. Generation is one thing, but getting it to the grid and on a 24-hour basis reliably is a completely different set of circumstances. And this government is just doubling down. And I think Liddell is actually closed now, but it hasn't. I don't think the full impact's come yet from the weather. But I can't see how they can blatantly stand there and say we've got to lower the cost of living. You got to get cheap electricity in the never. When they know the capital expenditure. I mean, if anyone bothers to go through and do the sums on how much you got to spend on wind turbines, solar panels, batteries, and transmission lines, and then add that all up, and then say, all right, I've got the people who put that infrastructure has got to make 10% or something, or annually at least, before anything else. They should be able to just do the simple maths. Well, our electricity has got to be at least 10% of the total cost every year, and then we've got to make sure we've got to add for the fact that in 20 years we've got to replace it all. So that's what the providers of the wind turbines are working on too. That they've got to get this all in 20 years before they put the next lot off. Although there won't be a next lot because there won't be any materials for it. But
that's another story.
It's sort of scary in regards to they can just blatantly continue to repeat these things, and unfortunately, it seems that a lot of people believe it.
Well, anyone that first year economics should learn the difference between marginal costs and average costs. Marginal costs are, it's essentially it's free, as they say, because when the wind blows and the sun shines, it costs you nothing, predominantly very little to generate the electricity. But as you said, average cost takes into account the actual capital that's needed, which comes down over the more units, but it's declining. But essentially, it's the average cost, not the marginal cost that matters with respect to comparisons. Particularly in the development of this industry. And I think that's where they're sort of failing, and how they're able to get away with it.
But the other thing is that industry does not really generate wealth. It's not a wealth creating industry. It's not like if you build a new steel plant and you all of a sudden had exports of value-added steel to all places of the world. You now get foreign exchange in. You've got a lot of people employed, but that's not something this thing does. And the other scary part, like when we're looking at those figures, the money that's available there for infrastructure isn't very much from the government to promote wealth creating schemes. And then we also know that this last budget started giving us the chop in regional Queensland for dams, water projects and things like that. If we don't invest in those sort of things, we can't grow the pie. We can't increase agriculture. We can't encourage more people to come to the regions to invest in that. And I think there is hardly a water project left standing in Queensland, in regional Queensland, other than maybe I think they will continue to fund the repair of the Paradise Dam. It's arguable whether Hewitt will get sustained, but most of the other ones were basically gone. Although, let's face it, Bob Catter's Hell's Gate thing, well, I was never really impressed with that anyway. That was always a pipe dream and just something he got Morrison to concede with, I think, for a while. But like I say, we're a bit lost in regards to how we're going to get out of this hole. But the only way you can get out of such a situation is somehow generate more wealth. But if we're going to curtail the coal industry, we're not going to value add to our iron ore and make steel, and our ability to even do aluminium smelting now is at risk because of unreliable power and high cost power. What have we really got in the future to help us?
Well, I think that's the thing. I mean, for aluminium smelters, large manufacturing, I mean, if they are intensive, they're going to be taxed and you know, to death. And let's have a look. Manufacturing is about it. The reason we had a manufacturing sector that was competitive was because of low energy costs. And you know, our energy costs have spiraled, and they'll continue to spiral the more that we keep going down the renewables, you know, road for some time to come. I don't know how they understand, you know, the simple economics that you can't have a manufacturing industry with high energy costs and, you know, high taxes on them for an issue. It doesn't make any sense.
And here's a bit of a change. I mean, when they had the kumbaya with the government and big business and the unions back in about September last year or something like that, it sounded a bit like remember the big consensus thing when Hawke got in and the big conflabs then, similar sort of thing. But now the big businesses are starting to realise, with the new IR laws that are coming in, it's going to hurt them. But the thing is, they already knew they were going to hurt with the renewables, and this added, I think it's a tax on big business in regards to if they don't get their carbon emissions down, they're going to be penalised. And all of them know that they can't really do much about it. They're just going to have to pay the piper. But
certainly, yeah. I mean, that was the thing. I mean, that job summit was just, you know, everything was done. The deals were all done in the back rooms with the unions, and it was just a load of puffery, the whole thing. You know, and there wasn't really anything that I could see that was they always talk about productivity. Yeah, you know, where is it? How are we going to drive it? You know, these thought bubbles, which is what it was. You know, productivity has been extremely low, and a lot of that's got to do with a decline in particularly the mining industry, decline in capital expenditures. It has dived, which has, you know, been driving productivity lower, you know, lower than what it should be overall. So, you know, these are the problems. If you want to drive productivity, you need investment, and it's the missing ingredient that's not there.
The other thing is too, any wage rises without productivity gains is just inflationary.
Certainly.
But you know, again, economics 101, it doesn't seem like Bowen, Albanese or Chalmers has done it.
Well, I don't think they understand eco. I think they still take the university books, and that's about as far, because I know they've got some economics background, but I think that's about as far as it goes. And I guess none of them have actually worked outside of the, or government or a union office. So I don't think
Our
that's far
conversation
removed
really
from
hasn't
reality.
inspired me with confidence in regards to we're going to be a nation on the rise anytime soon. So I'm tending, from our talk and the figures and that, I'm tending that this budget has taken us towards poverty, probably for the middle class anyway. I think they will be the ones who will bear the brunt, and they will be sort of the new welfare recipients in the near future.
Yep. Well, I mean, that's how we'll wait and see. As we said, the insolvencies are starting to rise significantly. We're still going to start to see a lot of homeowners as well. But a lot of businesses have got their homes up as well as collateral and everything for their businesses. So it's going to be a very large problem, and if we don't get the inflation under control, and the government needs to stop spending as much. That's just need to stop contributing to it.
I think the other thing, I think they need to let business get on with being, doing their job. But now that we're sort of in this situation, with all the negative talk against coal and other industries and that, or high carbon emission industries, the amount of investment that's going to come into this country is going to dry up. I gather that it's already impacted a fair bit on the coal industry, and I suspect it will impact further on the high emissions manufacturing areas and the high those industries. Is there no one that sort of can make good in the new economy?
Wow. They're just killing the golden goose, aren't they? I'd like to see if we are going for coking coal to be a critical mineral, like it should be, because without that you can't build windmills, solar panels, and it's a great point.
well, that's one thing about Queensland. It's interesting. When I spoke to Nick Johnson, that the bulk of Queensland is at least coking coal, and you think we'd get some brownie points or dispensation for the fact that it's not thermal, but that doesn't seem to really help our investment either.
No, certainly not. Well, you've seen production has we when we looked at the figures last time, production's still pretty flat. It's all the what they've done is predominantly all been prices. Over the last couple of years. So, but we're with Bowen coking coal, that's one up, and we just got to hope that sort of sense prevails, and we see some more projects going up. But obviously, I can't see that happening at the moment.
But it must be hard because you get the bigger companies actually selling their assets, and you're sort of depending on smaller players taking the risk and even it'll be even more difficult for them to raise money normally than big players. So it's going to be harder and harder as we go.
Well, particularly when with all the green tape and red tape and everything, with trying to get your significant project up. So obviously, the smaller you are, the more disadvantaged you are with respect to that. So as you said, massive disadvantages for being a small company. Within large, within coal and those sort of volume industries.
So we're just basically just looking at the graphs and that. There doesn't seem to be any influence on the governments over time to change their position. Will it have to get to the stage where our economy gets blown up? We're just not exporting enough, where our foreign exchange turns sour, and we have to go to austerity before the governments, but political parties change their perspective on what their job is as far as the economy goes, and what will change. Is that what we need for the voters to also be a bit more thoughtful in regards to what they do at the ballot box, in regards what's happening with the economy, rather than just, well, they're giving us a new sports oval, or they're giving us a toilet block, because that seems to be, some of the thinking. Do you think we can ever get to a situation where the voter public sees a little bit more of the big picture?
Well, I think they're starting to see it now with what's happening, that things aren't as good as what they told them they would be, and it's going to be a time where this Labor government, federal Labor government, it's going to run out of being able to blame the last government for everything. So there's going to be a point where it's going to be their responsibility. So and it's only, as you see, it's only going to get tougher for the next few years over the medium term, especially to bring that inflation down.
So just as a guess, who do you think's going to buckle first? The public and sort of being a bit more wise, or the media actually do its job and be critical of things and being a bit upfront with the Australian people?
Well, I think, yeah. Well, I guess it's what media that you watch. So, yeah. I obviously I think the public are going to be feeling it, and it's going to get significantly worse before it gets better. So, I the way things are at the moment, as I said, I can't see inflation. I can see it being relatively sticky. Particularly with these wage rises that are getting up, and the IR reforms that are going in and everything, and then the government spending that's not being reduced, increasing at 5% a year on average. I mean, that's, I can't see, without a large recession, I can't see things getting better or inflation coming down for over the medium term anyway. So,
and I suppose the other thing is, particularly Labor governments, they don't really care if the debt goes up, as long as they're seen to be giving people money, other people's money, even though there's a chance of other people's money running out. But it is in their nature to keep things going by handing out more money to the general public, to keep things sort of them in the good books, if you know what. They're not very good at austerity.
No, definitely not. And I mean, it's, I guess, yeah, I mean, it's the pantomime, and getting back to what you said, as Thatcher said, socialism never works, because eventually you run out of other people's money. And, it's, we'll see how this plays out.
I suppose the worst thing is that when it plays out badly, you get a change of government, and then they've got to do all the nasty things.
That's right.
And as soon as it's the same old story, as soon as they get things back on track, well, the public want to forget all the austerity and go for another Labor government.
Yeah, go for the vibe.
Okay, we've done over the hour. I really appreciate your time. I'm pretty pessimistic in regards to our future, regards to this budget and the direction we're going, and the fact that it doesn't seem any interest in turning things around in the short to medium term, or even the long term. So maybe we'll just be like the United States and just have endless debt, and we just keep raising it on the hope that no one calls in our debt.
Australia isn't America. It is not. If our currency declines significantly, then we're going to be in trouble. We're going to have no investment. No one's going to buy our bonds. Simple as that. We'll be like Greece.
Well, the thing is, I mean, it's really only iron ore and coal that's keeping our dollar where it is. I mean, without those two export earners, where would you think the Australian dollar might be?
Yeah, significantly lower.
50 cents.
Definitely.
On that
Well,
sad note,
ironically, it's good for your exports, but you know, when
yeah,
your manufacturing exports have been destroyed,
but
and your heavy
well,
industry.
keeps everyone at home. They won't be able to afford to travel, so they'll see Australia. Look, on that note, I want to thank you very much. If you just hold on the line, I'll just wrap up the show and introduce tomorrow night's guest. Thanks, Marcus.
Thanks, Bill. Anytime.
If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please join me tomorrow night when my guest is Gary Johns. He's a committee member for the No campaign, and he also was instrumental in the merger of Recognise Better and Australian Unity. So now we have a single group going in with the No campaign. And it looks like it will be a reasonably potent force with both Mundine and Price spearheading that cause. So please join us again tomorrow night.